Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Since this piece is supposed to be about fundraising, I think we should just jump in right there and start with sort of the path of raising that it's been for you with TaskRabbit, from sort of what I understand was a real coming up in terms of learning curve of knowledge when you first started, to now you just closed your Series C and you've raised about $40 million.
Yes, yep.
So can you tell us about how you got yourself educated on, like, from the beginning, and advice that you might have for founders that are going through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started TaskRabbit back in Boston in 2008. I actually had the idea in February. I was still at IBM at the time as an engineer. Ended up quitting my job, leaving, and starting TaskRabbit. And I became just really obsessed with the idea of what it could become and this product I wanted to build. And it came from a very much of an engineering mindset, not a business mindset. And so I had no idea what it meant to raise money. I had no idea there were people called angel investors. Once I started learning, and one of the key things I think that helped me a lot was just getting the right early mentors.
You were mentored by Scott Griffith from Zipcar, right?
Scott Griffith from Zipcar was an early mentor, and he was someone who I met through a friend of a friend of a friend, and loved the idea for TaskRabbit, saw a lot of similarities to how he was thinking about Zipcar. And so kind of took me under his wing, and we started talking about this idea of fundraising. And he's like, you know, you should go out and maybe see if you can raise a small seed, a couple $100,000. This was in late 2008, which actually was the worst time ever to be fundraising. And I remember thinking, like, okay, I'm gonna take hundreds of thousands of dollars from these people. Like, what if it doesn't work? Does that mean I have to give it back? Like, I don't understand this process. So there was a huge learning curve. And I think that's important to emphasize, because I didn't jump into this knowing everything. And I think as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you have to be confident enough in yourself and your own abilities that you're gonna figure it out, whatever comes your way. And so mentors were really important early on. And then I participated in an incubator program that Facebook was running out here called FB Fund.
And how important was that choice to do that to the rest of your fundraising?
Yeah, that was pivotal for me. So at the time, I had really only launched the site in Boston. And I had 2 angel investors in Boston who were early investors in Zipcar as well, put in, I think it was $150,000. And this was early of 2009. And I applied to Facebook Fund, and Dave McClure, I don't know if he's here today, was running it. I didn't know Dave ahead of time, and he's such a character, I love him. But he was shocking to me at first, when I first met him. And so I remember actually being in Boston at the Zipcar office and getting on a conference call with Dave and Shervin, and there was a whole council that was choosing who was gonna be part of Facebook Fund. And we didn't, at that time, do video conference or anything like that, so it was just via phone. It was incredibly intimidating, and pitching them on this idea for TaskRabbit. And we were invited to come out and participate. We were one of 25 companies invited out. It was a very, very small investment. So actually, at the time, a lot of folks, including Scott, were kind of like, I don't know if you should do it. Like, it's like $15K. Like, do you really, why don't you just stay here, build the business here, continue to fundraise here? But I just had a gut feeling that there was something else out here that was gonna be the catalyst for me. And so I just took the leap and did it. I had never been to the West Coast prior to that. I was an East Coast girl, sort of born and raised in the Boston area. I went to school in Virginia, so I always on the East Coast. But got on a plane and came out for Facebook Fund. And at the end of that program is when I met Ann Miraco from Floodgate, Steve Anderson from Baseline, and then Rob Hayes from First Round Capital, who came together, and I was able to raise a $1.8 million seed at that time.
How many investors did you talk to when you went through that initial process?
So many. I mean, particularly at that time, 2008, 2009 were not easy times to fundraise. And it's so interesting for me, I think, to have that perspective now because we literally, so we've raised $40 million to date, close to 40 million. The majority, I mean the vast majority has come in the last 12 months. Everything prior to that was so hard and so different to get done.
Say more about that.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
what specifically was really hard?
well, it was tough to get money in 2008, 2009. Investors were definitely, not investing as much. They were playing things very close to their chest. They were getting cold feet about investments that they were doing. The stock market had just crashed and people were getting laid off. And, for a business like TaskRabbit, it actually ended up being the best time to start a company like this because we were able to empower a lot of people that were unemployed or underemployed to find work. And so serendipitously, for me, it was the best time to start the business, but not the best time to fundraise.
But you got it done.
Got it done, yeah.
So that brings me to my next question, which is, really what most of the money is for, which is scaling. Mm-hmm. And the conversation around, you actually stepped down from the role of CEO, and then you kind of came back into it 9 months later. And there's been some interesting writing. Reid Hoffman wrote a great article about his thoughts about when a founder should step down from CEO or take on another CEO. And there's been conversation about that. What was that experience like for you? I know that it wasn't pushed by your investors. It was actually your choice. But what was the experience like bringing him on, having him in the company, and then ultimately making the decision that you were going to take it back, and why?
Yeah. So to start off, I guess, for me, I've always felt like TaskRabbit is such a special idea and a huge idea, and it's big enough to have the impact to have a meaningful change in the world. And so I've always been able to kind of pull myself as the founder out of that and separate myself from that vision to some extent, because I just feel like sometimes
it was bigger than you.
Yeah, it's much bigger than me, right? And so one, I've just never had a huge ego about those types of things. And I've always been able to say, like, at this moment in time, what is the best decision I can make for the company? And so, it was right after we raised our Series A round of financing. This was probably like, March, April of 2011. And it was a tough raise. I talked to a lot of investors. The market was just starting to come back then. But we had been operating on our seed capital for over 18 months, so for a long time. And we got the Series A done, but it wasn't easy. And I really felt like we needed to shift gears as a company. I felt like we were only launched in 2 markets at the time, Boston and San Francisco, so I knew that we needed to roll out to more cities and expand really quickly. I knew that we needed to scale operations and financial operations, and I knew we needed to scale the team and do a lot of hiring. And coming from a background in product and engineering, which I'm very passionate about, I felt like, okay, here's a great opportunity. I've just raised this A round of funding. Why don't we go out and start to figure out who we can bring on to build out this management team? And I actually wasn't looking specifically for a CEO.
You were considering COO as well?
Yeah, I was actually considering a lot of different options, and I met a ton of different people. And I worked with an executive recruiter named John Love, who was able to connect me with just a wide variety of folks. So senior VPs to COO candidates to a few CEO candidates. And at the end of the search, we met with, I probably met with, 100 different people, all different levels, over the course of 6 months. And it was like every day I had at least two new people to meet or a second meeting to take, and it's a process, right? And this is like my baby that I just want to get set up in the right way so that we can scale this business. And so at the end of the process, it was probably 6-8 months later, the final candidates were a couple COO candidates, and then Eric, who was a CEO. He had been a CEO before. He has an incredible background, and he's an incredible person. And we just really hit it off. And we worked great together. We had a great time. And I guess what we found over the course of those 9 months is that my passion for product and engineering actually needed to be more at the forefront of the business. That even though, yes, we needed to open a new city, so we actually opened in 9 new markets, and we scaled the team up to 65 people, and Eric was incredibly helpful in getting all of that infrastructure set up for us. Once we did that, it was clear that product and technology still needed to be the main focus of the business, of the vision, that there was still a lot of work to do there. And because I'm so passionate about that area, it was just the sort of community decision for me to step back in and do that transition. And, you know, listen, every transition is difficult on a team, and it's difficult on people, and it's never easy. But I think, you know, as a founder, if you can always be thinking about what's best for your company at that moment, and that might change. That might change 6 months down the road, 9 months down the road, 2 years down the road. I just feel like you really need to be adaptable and flexible to those different situations.
And your investors are obviously extremely supportive of you being back in that. Who are your investors again?
So our A round was led by Shasta Ventures. Sean Flynn's on our board. And then we did our B round in December of 2011. God, I can't believe it's 2013. It's crazy. Led by Lightspeed Ventures, Justin Callbeck's on our board. And then we just did our C round of funding led by Founders Fund, who are incredible to work with. And I mean, those guys are big thinkers, and they see the vision for this business, and our visions are very much aligned. And so when we decided to bring Founders Fund in, that wasn't a full process and a full raise. It was just like, we have to get these guys involved. They can do great things with us.
Because you've known them over the years, and you've had the relationship, and they understood where you were coming from.
Yeah, exactly. And we had met, actually, after I did a talk at Le Web in Paris in 2011. And Bruce Gibney followed up with me after that. And over the course of 9 months, we grabbed coffee, we grabbed lunch, we talked about the business. Actually, at the time, I was running product. I wasn't the CEO, but we just stayed in very close touch. And so when I stepped back in, we decided that this would be a great time to get Founders Fund involved as well, and it's been a great partnership.
Let's just talk about challenges really quickly also with scaling, because I think that that's a question when I was sort of taking temperature on what people were interested in hearing about, particularly rolling out to multiple cities or internationally when you are taking your business there. What are some of the challenges that you've had to overcome that you've run into that were surprises to you?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people think, or a lot of people ask me, they'll say, you know, why can't you just be open everywhere at once? And I've given a lot of thought to this too. I mean, I think it's a valid question and it's a valid approach. And for me, I think particularly because early influences I had from Scott Griffith at Zipcar, who scaled Zipcar city by city by city. And he had lived that, he had a lot of experience with it, he had seen the pros and cons of doing it that way, and he was able to, you know, just early on give me a lot of those learnings. And so I've always felt like going deep in our core markets before we expand to new ones is really important. And I feel that way because every time someone posts a task in a new city, I want to make sure that they have a consistently amazing user experience. And if we were open everywhere at once, it would not be consistent. I'm not really sure if it would be amazing. The product would be the same, but because we have all of these on-the-ground, offline components to our business, in this marketplace business, and we have supply and demand ratios that we need to keep in balance, it's really important to understand those metrics that are really at the core of the health of the marketplace. And so one of the things that we've really honed in over time are what are the metrics that make our marketplace healthy? And
what are they?
Well, there's a few key things. So one is definitely the ratio between supply and demand, between our task posters and our TaskRabbits. And any marketplace business has this, right? eBay has this, Odesk has this, all marketplaces have these ratios. what's interesting with us is we have a few other dimensions that we also have to layer on. So we have to ensure that the supply and demand in a certain zip code is the right ratio, but then also in a certain category, because TaskRabbit is a broad platform of hundreds of different things you can get done. There's different skills involved, different TaskRabbits that have expertise, and so we've had to learn a lot about, in this sort of three-dimensional world of geography and category and actual supply and demand, what makes sense. So we've built internally platforms and analytical tools that help us assess that. Another really key metric, I'd say the two key metrics are, one, this ratio of supply and demand across dimensions, and then two is Net Promoter Score, NPS, and it's something we measure very closely. So Net Promoter Score is basically a measure of whether or not people are having a good experience on TaskRabbit and whether or not they're likely to refer a friend. If you don't have good Net Promoter Scores, then you can't really drive a lot of organic or word of mouth growth. And so that's the way we determine on both sides of the marketplace, our net promoters for our task posters and our net promoter for our TaskRabbits, are they having a consistently amazing user experience?
We're going to have to wrap up, so this is the last thing that I'm going to ask, is just your overview and your predictions for the whole idea of shared economy and the collaborative consumption space.
Yeah, it's a funny word, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So it's funny to me because when I started TaskRabbit in 2008, when I had this idea in the second bedroom of my apartment in Boston, words like the sharing economy, like collaborative consumption, never existed. Didn't even exist yet.
You coined service networking.
At the
too,
time,
right?
I was like, social networking's really popular. There's this next phase. There's something that's going to come after social that is going to be a game changer, online and offline. And I believe that it is in this sharing economy, in these service marketplaces. And I think we have only scratched the surface of what's possible to date. I think we're still very early in our innovation of this space. These are businesses, because they're all marketplace businesses, because they're all peer-to-peer, are going to take a long time to develop. Marketplaces are their own little funky organisms.
Are you awake?
Just making sure you're awake, people. And I was hearing it in my head, and I was like, I'm going to say this, and I don't know if it's right. It wasn't. That's okay.
It's all right.
Yeah.
They liked it.
Yeah. So, you know, they have their own behaviors, and they take a lot of time to form. And so I think we're going to see a lot more innovation in the space. I think particularly in trust and safety, in reputation, and in payments. I see a huge opportunity to do something completely different that hasn't been done before, that's really going to enable the sharing economy to thrive.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leah. It was a pleasure to interview you.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.